I've been living in Japan for way too long. More than a third of my life now. Yes, I love it and I plan on staying. And no, it isn't a social utopia. I know it's very easy to find TV programs praising Japanese children for cleaning their own classrooms and preparing lunch. But would they also brag about adults working 13 hours a day with no more productivity than their Western counterparts? I doubt it. When you've been here for as long as me, you take off the rose-tinted glasses and acknowledge both the good and the bad. There also seems to be a romanticizing of Japanese games among gamers. Now it's true, there were a lot of amazing Japanese games that were never localized for the Western market, although there are also plenty of games that stay in Japan for a good reason. That topic could fill an entire episode on its own, but today I want to talk about the perception of quirkiness and nonsensicality in Japanese artwork, and what happens when its magic wears off. Japanese developed games are often praised for their absurdity, with their imaginative graphic designs of unique characters or comical takes on animals. Considering that these are video games, it makes sense to get playful and present them in a way that puts the player in a silly mood. That aesthetic isn't limited to games either. Of course, Japanese anime has always been known for exaggerated facial expressions, and as proven by the near household name status of Miike Takashi, Western connoisseurs have also come to expect unbelievable, over-the-top content from Japanese movies. Naturally, this kind of artwork was one of the things that attracted me to Japan in the first place, and in many ways, I still love it. But I noticed my capacity for it began to change as time passed. It really dawned on me during a trip home after I had been living here for a few years. Somehow my family had gotten a hold of a Japanese movie called Samurai Fiction and told me I absolutely had to watch it because it was so funny. Well, I attempted to watch it a couple times but never made it to the end. Never once was it even remotely entertaining or funny. I think it's supposed to be a comedy making fun of older Japanese movie conventions, but there's no context or build-up to anything, and I just found myself saying, okay, and? There's a scene where an aging ninja falls from the roof because he's losing his nimbleness, a samurai sword fight where a couple goons have to wait for their opponent to take a piss on the side of the road. I just don't see what's funny about any of it. It occurred to me that my family had seen it as something distant and unfamiliar, and it's easier to entertain somebody if they're caught off guard. But if Japan is no longer this mysterious place on the opposite side of the universe, a couple guys making angry faces while another takes a piss isn't all that funny. It's just boring. I guess you could call it the loss of innocence. But as with any loss, there's also a gain. I can look at Japanese artwork and video games from a more objective standpoint, without giving anything and everything a free pass, just because it's by those zany Japanese. Definitely the most prominent game series that's loved mostly for its absurd graphical style is the Parodius series. Long before I came to Japan, I had friends telling me about this insane shooter that was a parody of the greatest games, with the wackiest boss characters you could possibly fathom. And yeah, the Parodius games are a never-ending stream of imagination with frantic penguins, cat airships, octopi, and a trillion other kooky characters. But at the end of the day, gameplay is what it all comes down to, and every Parodius title is just another game in the Gradius mold from our good friends at the Factory of Derivative Sequels, aka Konami. If you've played any Gradius game, you could just as well say you've played every Parodius game. Replacing spaceships with silly animals just isn't enough to impress me anymore. But it gets much worse than Parodius. They're all well-made games, they're just uninventive. One of the worst cases I've ever seen of Japanese absurdity clouding the eyes of gamers is Super Bonk for the SNES. I loved the first two Bonk games on the TurboGrafx 16, and watching a few minutes of Super Bonk makes it look really appealing. You're constantly transforming into animals, growing bigger and smaller, and just experiencing zaniness to the max in general. Which would all be great if it wasn't for one little problem. There is absolutely no depth to the action in Super Bonk. Yeah, that little thing called gameplay has a tendency to get overlooked sometimes. Walk along slowly, hop up and down, go into the bonus levels, that's it. No challenging platforming, no quick dodging, no deep boss patterns to be learned. Super Bonk is spectacularly boring. It's for 5-year-olds. It's nearly impossible to lose. So you figure, okay, the point of the game is to collect as many smiley faces as possible. maybe to see the best ending or something. Well, there's this little flying monster that appears at random sometimes, flies at you sporadically. If it even nicks you, you lose, wait for it, half of your smileys. And if you're in a cramped area, just give up. You're fucked. The control in the Bonk games isn't quick enough to consistently avoid this kind of thing. That's why they aren't one-hit death games. So you could be playing for 45 minutes of slow, mundane progress only to have it jacked from you in a heartbeat. Super Bonk is this far away from being utter trash. But Western gamers seem to think it's some kind of overlooked masterpiece because of the presentation alone. Pro Jared, I'm looking at you. Pro Jared has an episode about Super Bonk and spends the entire time being wowed at how zany and goofy everything is in the game. Now, I love Pro Jared's videos. They're extremely informative. But this is a perfect example of a person completely overlooking a game's faults simply because it's quirky Japanese. He doesn't once even mention that the game offers zero challenge. But Pro Jared is most certainly not alone, because I just checked eBay and the cheapest complete copy of Super Bonk was $200. There are more expensive games, but $200 is getting up there. A complete copy in Japan is around 10 or 15, making it one of the cheapest 2D platformers on the system. And it isn't because the market was flooded with copies. There are definitely more copies of Mega Man X, and that sells for around 50. Super Bonk is cheap in Japan because there's nothing keeping Japanese gamers from realizing that it's a subpar game. It doesn't stop there. A part of me wants to feel bad about beating up on the Bonk series so much in this episode, but they really deserve it. Because the worst example I've ever seen of a game using outrageous graphics to cover up crap gameplay is Super Air Zonk for the TurboGrafx CD. Super Air Zonk is so painfully boring, it's impressive. Enemies show up and basically present themselves on a platter for you to shoot down, bosses are no better, and they take forever to kill. You would have to try very hard to make a game this bad, especially after how good the first Air Zonk game was. Red Company obviously kept their graphic artists and lost everyone else who worked on the project. Again, the North American version is expensive as hell. In Japan, it's around $40, despite being somewhat uncommon. So, the magic of silly, absurd character design in Japanese games doesn't have the same effect on me that it used to. I still love games with creative artwork, but if the underlying gameplay isn't all that good, the one doesn't cancel out the other. I could name tons of games with zany artwork and great gameplay also. Dynamite Heady, Illmatic Envelope, Katamari Damacy. And actually, it just so happens that a series, which I think of as a personal Bible, is probably one of the most outrageous creations a Japanese mind has ever given the world. Bobobo Bobobo. My Japanophile viewers may be acquainted with Bobobo, but if not, it was a Japanese comic book and anime series that took outrageousness and absurdity to the next level, and then a couple levels higher. The story is all about an evil group out to conquer the world by tearing people's hair out and making them bald, and the protagonist battles them with his nose hair. Trust me, that's nothing. Bobobo meets his best friend, a sun-star-like thing, by having a battle with him to find out who can tell the most heart-wrenching story. Bobobo wins with his story about how he was writing a poem to enter a contest on Christmas Eve because he couldn't get a girlfriend. Even Medio couldn't stand a chance against that. So what it comes down to is, I'm perfectly happy to embrace Japanese wackiness in games and anywhere else, if there's something original to it. As always, I've made this video to try and encourage my viewers to be critical and form their own opinions, even if it means going against the majority. Thanks a lot for watching. That is the end of this episode. If you enjoyed it, do hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.